As an assassin, he was treated like a dog on a leash, only to be betrayed and cast aside like a pawn, but then he was reborn into a brand new life where he would forge his own destiny. In the beginning, they wrote him off as talentless. Before long, they were calling him the next in line for the throne. A sword prodigy respected by nobles and feared by his enemies, he no longer lives to serve, but to rise up and one day stand before the very man who took his life. Can honor and vengeance ever truly walk the same path? Let's find out. The story kicks off with the cool night wind, the dim moonlight, and a killer's intuition all whispering the same grim premonition. Rayon, our protagonist, found himself on one knee before Robert Daryus. The man remarked that he had done an excellent job. Rayon agreed, thinking to himself that this was it, he was going to die at this man's hands today. Daryus added that Rayon had proven himself a worthy leader of the shadows. With his work from the darkness, the family's power would grow even faster. Our protagonist calmly replied that he was merely doing what was required of him, all while wondering if a shadow could ever truly defy the will of its master. He stated that a shadow's purpose is to follow its master's will. It's not meant to have a will, feelings, or opinions of its own. Daryus replied with a smirk that this was true, and if Rayon knew that so well, then how dare he act on his own free will? How did he manage to break free from the brainwashing? A jolt of fear shot through Rayon as he wondered how could he possibly know. You see, the Robert family uses intense psychological conditioning to control the shadows, their personal group of assassins. They kidnap or purchase children and train them to become killers for the family. These children handle all the dirty work and take the fall for any consequences right up until the day they die. In other words, these kids are raised to be the loyal attack dogs of the Robert family. Rayon had been brainwashed too, but one day he accidentally shattered those mental chains. But how did Daryus know? Desperate, our protagonist demanded to know how he found out. Daryus explained that he and all the other assassins were wearing two collars. The first was the brainwashing, and the second was this. He snapped his fingers, and in that single moment, an unbearable pain erupted inside our protagonist. He doubled over, coughing up blood, wondering what in the world this agony was. It felt like his heart was being torn clean in half. Daryus nonchalantly added that this particular collar was called the raging worm. There's an insect inside his body that will feast on his heart on command. Rayon realized this was the most nightmarish curse imaginable, a spell that lets you experience the true meaning of being a slave. He seethed that Daryus had actually planted a raging worm in him, as if the brainwashing wasn't enough for them. And this man paraded around acting like a righteous and honorable figure. He was utterly disgusting. Daryus simply replied that he was just a cautious man. After all, Rayon had somehow managed to shake off the brainwashing. He mused that all people wear masks, and it just turned out that his was more impenetrable. Rayon's life flashed before his eyes. He was kidnapped at an age when his memories were still a blur. They raised him to be a hunting dog and a killer, loyal only to the Robert family until he rose to become the head of the shadows. He lived as an empty vessel without his own emotions or thoughts. Then, completely by accident, he discovered a breathing technique called the Ring of Fire. And as if to prove it was once the divine skill of the greatest swordsman on the continent, it allowed him to completely shatter the brainwashing. He thought he could finally dream of being free. Hope had actually started to blossom inside him. So why was he meeting his end here instead of finding that freedom? What sins had he committed to deserve such a meaningless death? Engulfed by the potent magical curse, our protagonist began to force himself to his feet, refusing to accept this fate. If he was going to die here no matter what, then he would at least take an arm with him. No, even landing a single wound would be enough. Daryus watched in shock, wondering how he was even standing in that state. With a final burst of speed, our protagonist lunged forward and inflicted a small cut, thinking that now his death wouldn't be so pathetic. Seeing the fresh wound, Daryus moved with lightning speed and cut off his head, thinking to himself that he had foreseen every possibility. Yet this man had dispelled the brainwashing and even managed to attack him. As Daryus began to walk away, ignoring the sting from the rampaging worm's curse, he noted that it had been a long time since this happened. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd been injured, and now to get a little bite from his own hunting dog. How ridiculous, since the man was dead. There was no need to worry anymore. He ordered the others to dispose of the body. In an instant, the rest of the shadows appeared from thin air, and obediently began to carry out the command. As his consciousness faded away, Rayon's last thought was a cold, hard fact. Daryus was considered the strongest martial artist on the continent. There was never any way he could have defeated him. One was strong and the other was weak. He could not do anything at all. He regretted living such a meaningless life. He regretted being humiliated and manipulated all his life. And he regretted that he was never able to complete the Ring of Fire. He did not care if it was a god or a demon. He asked, "Let someone do it." He wants revenge at all costs. Suddenly, a system window appeared, which says that he was chosen by rage. Rage absorbs his target body dead. An error occurred, and a moment later, MC was reborn as a baby. Sylvia, the new mother of the protagonist holding a rattle in her hands, said with a smile, "Let him look." What is so interesting here, she, looking at him, took him in her arms and said that he is her sunshine. What a sweet baby he is. The protagonist thought that he still can't get used to it. The woman who is babysitting him is called Sylvia. He still finds it hard to believe. She took him in her arms and said with a smile, "Go on, try and say mama." The MC, now this woman's baby, thought to himself. He'd been reborn, keeping every single memory from his past life as an assassin. At first he figured he was just dreaming, maybe stuck in a coma for 100 days straight, but as time dragged on, he never woke up. So he had no choice but to accept it. This was reincarnation. A while later, Sylvia, holding him in her arms, wondered aloud if the weather was nice outside today as well. She voiced her hope that the head of the family would return soon to give him a lovely name. The protagonist mused that they couldn't just call him the son forever. The head of the family hadn't shown his face in over 3 months. He must be one heck of a busy man. The MC didn't know much since his reincarnation, but he could tell he'd been born into a wealthy and apparently quite famous family. He figured it was way better than being born a commoner. After all, he still had a score to settle. Rage and the thirst for revenge consumed his thoughts, but he knew he had to be patient. Since he'd never left this room, he had no real idea where he was. He also didn't fully grasp his family's status, let alone the mess he was currently in. Besides, he'd failed to master the Ring of Fire in his past life, which was all the more reason to bide his time. He was once known as the greatest killer in the history of the Robert family. To get his revenge, he could bottle up his emotions for as long as it took. By the way, he wondered, this mansion is massive and opulent. There's no way they're just a famous family. Suddenly, a maid burst into the room, excitedly shouting that the head of the family was about to arrive. Sylvia's eyes lit up. Is father really coming? Hearing this, the MC thought, "Father, does that mean the head of this family is my grandfather?" The woman excitedly said she needed to get ready, but the maid told her it was too late. He was already here. They both froze, waiting for the family head to appear. The protagonist felt a sudden chill, wondering what was causing the heavy tension in the air. 3 figures appeared at the end of the hall, and a guard announced, "The head of the family has arrived. Steers a Gebwa a bagger." The protagonist realized the man's presence alone was enough to create this suffocating atmosphere. If he was right, then there was no doubt. That golden blonde hair, those blazing red eyes, and that bone-chilling aura. It had to be the strongest man on the continent, the head of the Zgart family, the northern king of destruction, Glenn Zgart. It seemed he'd been reborn into the most powerful family on the entire continent. The man looked down at him and asked with a stone-cold expression, "Is this the child?" Sylvia eagerly asked if he'd like to hold him. Glenn took the baby and declared, "From this day forward, his name is Rayon. As the bearer of this name, let him live like a shadow, present but at the same time not." The MC was shocked. Even in this life, he was given the name Ron. Later that night, the protagonist lay in his crib wondering, are they asleep yet? After 100 unbearable days, this was finally his chance. Before, he was always overcome with sleepiness. And whenever he woke up, Sylvia was right there. He had no opportunity to practice with his mana or do anything at all. But now he had his own bed. And that was a very good thing. All right, he thought, isn't it time to begin? He sat up and began to channel the Ring of Fire, recalling how classic training involved breathing to absorb natural mana and concentrating the aura within one's energy core. However, the Ring of Fire he'd stumbled upon was a bit different. Just like how mages circulate mana, he's forming a unique energy cycle within his own body, which will boost his stamina, making him stronger, sharper, and more tuned to mana. It's basically the ultimate training method for anyone aspiring to be a top-tier martial artist. This gives him a huge edge over powerful foes like Daryus, who have no clue about the Ring of Fire. So by using this power, he can fortify both his mind and body, and once he masters the Zgart family's sword style, getting revenge on Daryus won't be just a pipe dream anymore. On top of that, he senses some kind of energy flowing through this body, one that's connected to the ice attribute. That must be why his body is always freezing, even though he's asleep most of the day. It looks like about 9 of his energy points are blocked. This is seriously bad. If this keeps up the cold blocking, his points will eventually kill him. He has to shatter the blockage with the Ring of Fire. But then again, just getting rid of such pure ice energy feels like a total waste. What if he could merge it with the flow of his flames and circulate it through his entire body? After thinking it over, he figured it would work slowly but surely. All of a sudden, he flopped onto his side. Am I really this tired after such a short training session, he wondered. Dang it, I can't. And just like that, he was out cold. Right at that moment, Glenn walked in to check on him. The next morning, our hero started crawling around on the floor. Sylvia, watching him happily, exclaimed how good he was. Just a little more crawling, she encouraged. He inwardly groaned, so sick of playing along with her. He was a grown man, and this whole acting like a baby thing was making him want to scream. With a smile, the woman scooped him up, gushing about how smart he was. Is there anything you can't do? He grumbled to himself that he'd almost rather be freezing all the time than deal with this. Suddenly, the ragged saint walked into the room, calling out to her, "Are you in here?" And seeing him, Sylvia beamed and called him Your Holiness. The saint just smiled and said, "What's all this about? Just call me sir." The MC thought to himself, is this really the ragged saint standing right in front of me? The one with divine powers, legendary medical skills, and abilities known across the entire world? Even though he was the most famous doctor on the continent, he was also the hardest to find since he was always on the move. The ragged saint mentioned he'd heard she'd had a baby and decided to drop by for a look. "So this is the little one?" he asked. The woman nodded with a smile and handed her son over to him. "Blonde hair and red eyes," he observed. "He takes right after you, doesn't he?" Sylvia smiled and agreed, asking, "Isn't he just adorable?" The ragged saint replied, "He is cute. Of course he looks nothing like Glenn, so what's his name?" The woman answered a bit nervously. "His name is Ron." He asked disapprovingly, "You don't mean he's named after a shadow? Do you naming your child after a shadow?" What in the world was Glenn thinking? The MC was surprised. Is he really calling the head of the family by his first name? That's pretty informal. He recalled hearing rumors that the Northern King of Destruction and the Ragged Saint were best friends. The old man smiled and said, "Here, let me have a look." He placed a hand on the baby's stomach and his expression turned serious. "This isn't good." Sylvia asked anxiously, "Is something wrong?" The Ragged Saint explained the child is afflicted by a frost curse. His mana circulation is being blocked by ice energy. It's only going to get worse from here. He needs treatment and then he'll be fine, but if he's just left as he is, he won't live for long. The woman asked in horror, "You're joking, right?" The old man replied, "I'll write you a prescription." Just then, a maid came into the room and informed him, "The head of the family is looking for you. I'm to escort you to him." The old man in rags replied, "I'll be there as soon as I'm finished here." She urgently explained, "The master insists on seeing you immediately." The ragged saint muttered with annoyance, "It's always immediately with him." "All right, I get it. Lead the way." The MC thought, so it's a frost curse. That explains everything, but just knowing the problem doesn't solve it. But since I'm already working on the Ring of Fire, it shouldn't be an issue. Suddenly, he felt his mother's tears fall onto his face. Sylvia cried hysterically, "This can't be happening. I can't lose him like this. What did you mean he won't live long? That's just impossible." She would move heaven and earth to make him well again. His mother was ready to do absolutely anything. He couldn't die. He couldn't be sick. The protagonist wondered what this strange feeling in his chest was. His heart felt like it was being crushed. The pain was immense. His entire body ached. It was agonizing. Watching her was pure torture. Suddenly, the protagonist stretched out his tiny hands trying to wipe the tears from her face, and then clumsily managed to say the word, "Mama, In an instant, Sylvia was rushing down the hall toward the head of the family. Hearing the commotion from the corridor, he asked, bewildered, "What's going on? What is all this noise?" Ignoring the maid's protest, the woman burst into the hall. Glenn asked, clearly displeased, "What is the meaning of this behavior? Where are your manners?" She dropped to her knees, bowed her head, and pleaded, "Please save Rayon. She should know his condition. This child is her entire world." She's pleading with him to save the boy. The head of the family, holding a cup, noted that this was a prime example of a martial artist's thorny path. Why should he bother helping someone who is incapable of contributing to the family? Sylvia insisted that he was his own grandson. Glenn shot back, asking what kind of grandson she brought him after running away from the family. He declared the only thing he was willing to give the boy was the Zgart surname. She should be thankful for that and not dare to ask for anything more. He had nothing else to say. He then ordered the guards to remove her. Sylvia screamed hysterically, begging him to save Rayon. After she was escorted out, the ragged saint sighed, remarking that Glenn was a stubborn fool. Was it really so hard to be honest? Why was he putting on such a show, especially since Glenn was the one who summoned him to check on his grandson's condition? Glenn took a sip of his drink and told him to cut the chatter and just spit it out. The saint reiterated that, as he'd said, the 9 mana streams in the boy's body were blocked by ice energy, and as he grew older, his condition would only continue to worsen. While Glenn's aura was suppressing the cold for now, he'd be all right for a while, but his grandson would almost certainly never become a martial artist. Glenn took another sip and remarked that as long as the boy was alive, everything was fine. The ragged saint pointed out that he was singing a completely different tune just moments ago. He told Glenn to just admit he thought his grandson was cute, but then questioned why he gave him the name Rayon. With all the wonderful names in the world, why call him a shadow? The head of the family replied that the name didn't originally mean shadow. Thousands of years ago, it held an entirely different meaning. Sometime later, Sylvia, holding the protagonist and a spoonful of medicine, gently explained that this was the remedy the ragged saint had provided. She warned him it would be bitter, but asked him to endure it for just a moment. She fed it to him, fully expecting a cry of protest. But our protagonist calmly stretched out his hands and began to babble. Overjoyed, the woman called out to the maid Helen, happily noting that he was enduring it and eating. She said with admiration that it was amazing. Usually children can't stand bitter things. It was as if he understood her intentions. Sylvia shed a few tears and hugged him tightly. The MC thought that while it was slightly bitter, this fire attribute medicine was exactly what he needed right now. After all, a fire attribute is the perfect counter to a frost curse. The woman asked if he could truly understand her feelings. The protagonist remained silent, thinking he would just let them keep feeding him the medicine he needed. After some time, the protagonist reflected that 2 years had passed since he began his training and started taking the medicine. Thanks to both. The creation of the Ring of Fire was in full swing. After reaching the first stage of his technique, he spent 2 years in constant training, interrupted only by silly games with Helen and Sylvia. There wasn't a more diligent child on the entire continent than him. He trained in secret after lights out while everyone else was sound asleep. Time continued to fly, and now he is 5 years old. A system window appeared before him announcing that the second stage of the Ring of Fire was now available. The effect increased his fortitude, mana, sensitivity, willpower, and his total amount of energy. The MC smiled and noted that he had finally done it. He thought about how he'd reached the second stage of the Ring of Fire technique. At this stage, a cross-shaped energy circulation opens up, and he could also feel mana much more clearly. He wondered if the system messages would explain this further. Suddenly, Helen entered the room with a smile, noting that he was up so early today, and asking if she could take his laundry. The protagonist agreed, thinking to himself that she clearly couldn't see the information window floating in front of him. The message windows had been appearing ever since he reached the first stage of the Ring of Fire. At first, he didn't understand where they came from, but the system had proven to be quite convenient. It allows him to track his current status. Judging by Helen's reaction, the window was definitely only visible to him. Anyway, now that he had reached the second stage, his low stamina and the frost curse were still an issue. If he didn't have the fire attribute medicine, it would have been much harder to improve so quickly. The medicine was one thing, but for these 5 years, Sylvia, Helen, and everyone else in the annex had been constantly worrying about his well-being. They treated him as if he were a crown prince on the verge of death. which also played a role. And while he's already turned 5 years old, he still has a lot of time ahead of him. So there's no point in rushing things. The Frost Curse is still a major issue, not to mention his low stamina. Because of that, he gets completely gassed the moment he starts moving around too much. But in his past life, he was called the greatest assassin for a reason, which is how he developed the incredible Ring of Fire technique. Once he masters it completely in this new body, he can use his past life's experience to wipe out all these physical problems in one go. And after he learns the Zgart family's sword skills, he'll finally be able to take Daryus' head, but he can't rush it. Daryus is one of the most powerful masters on the entire continent. If he lets his thirst for revenge get the better of him when they finally meet, he won't stand a chance. You can count the number of people strong enough to even challenge Daryus on one hand. So even though it's going to be a slow process, he has to focus on getting stronger first. The moment an opportunity presents itself, he needs to be ready to land a decisive blow, and that means the training never stops. Just then, Sylvia walked into the room smiling as she noticed he was awake. She gently reminded him, asking if he remembered they had somewhere to be today. She told him to get changed and ready to head over to the main building. Our MC realized that the day had finally come. On this continent, there are the 6 emperors and the 5 demons, the major powers that keep everything in balance. And the Zgart family he was reborn into just happens to be one of those 6 emperors. The 6 emperors represent the forces of good, while the 5 demons are the forces of evil, constantly in a struggle to see which way the scales of power will tip. To see if any new unknown variables have popped up in a family, they hold a determination ceremony, and today was the Zgart family's turn. A short while later, they arrived at a massive mansion. Everyone there was already gossiping among themselves. One guy asked another if this was his first time attending since last year's ceremony. The other guy shot back, sarcastically, that he'd been swamped with missions. He then mentioned hearing that today was all about testing the kids from the Branch family. The first guy mentioned he'd heard Lord Karen's 4th son was participating. The other confirmed it, adding that rumor has it it's Sylvia's son, which left the first guy looking confused. He asked what he meant, wondering if it was that outcast. Just then, our hero and his mother walked into the hall, and immediately every eye in the room shot daggers at them. The whispers started right away, with people pointing out that the child was indeed her son. He was so tiny, making it seem like the rumors about his poor health were true. They sneered that he inherited the blood of a failure and that nothing could be done about it. Or, to be more precise, an outcast. They couldn't believe all sorts of riffraff were being let into the sacred ceremony hall. Why was the son of an outcast even being allowed to participate in the determination ceremony? This just goes to show how far the family's standards have fallen. Listening to all this, our MC noted that all the insults were coming from members of the main family branch. He wondered if they'd all planned this out or something. He couldn't care less what they said about him, but he drew the line at the whispers about his mother. Sylvia, sensing his tension, called his name and gave him a reassuring smile, telling him everything was all right. She told him to just keep his eyes on her. Suddenly, a powerful voice boomed through the hall, announcing the arrival of the head of the Zgart family. Glenn made his entrance and took his seat on the throne. Our protagonist thought to himself that it had been a long time. 5 years, wasn't it? With a grim expression, the family head observed that it looked like everyone had assembled. In a flash, the sword of justice materialized in the center of the hall, and a voice announced that they were beginning the determination ceremony. Our MC was taken aback, realizing it was the legendary sword of justice. The moment you touch that weapon, it instantly gauges your predisposition to mana. An aide announced that it was time to start. The first participant would be Ron Zgart. Buren acknowledged the call, walked up to the sword, and placed his hand on it. Our hero recalled that, starting at the age of 4, the mana channel in a child's skull, the one that opens to the heavens, begins to seal itself shut. After that point, their mana level doesn't really change all that much. That's why kids are brought to the determination ceremony to figure out their ultimate potential. In reality, the entire assessment happens right here and now. As Buren touched the sword, a powerful gust of wind swirled around him. The crowd buzzed with excitement, noting that based on the light glowing from the sword, he possessed a high purity attribute, just as you'd expect from one of Karun's children. They all praised what a talented boy he was. Glenn, with a serious expression, stated that it was a fitting attribute for a future swordmaster. He instructed Buren to focus on cultivating his wind affinity from now on. The aide then announced the next participant. One of them was Luna Slyan from the Vassal family. Our protagonist watching all this unfold figured he'd grasped the basic idea. The length of the light beams determined the mana's purity, while the swirls themselves showed its attribute. So this was how the Zgart family sized up the talent of their kids. As the girl placed her hand, the onlookers started buzzing with excitement. Could the Slyan family have produced another genius? Well, she carries their last name for a reason. She's practically on Burns' level. The MC mused that it seemed a person's worth around here was truly decided by talent alone. He figured his own results probably wouldn't be anything to write home about. Even though his ring of fire was at the second stage, the ice attribute was still mixed into his energy. Not that it was a huge deal. After seeing Luna's results, the assistant declared them good. And now for our final participant, Ron Zgart. Let him step forward. Sylvia smiled, telling him it was his turn. Our hero agreed, thinking to himself that he didn't really have any high hopes. He was just curious to find out what kind of mana attribute this body had and which one he should focus on cultivating from now on. The woman asked with a gentle smile. You've seen how the other children did it, haven't you? Just copy them. The protagonist nodded and, walking up to the sword, placed his hand on it. Instantly, everything around him erupted in a blaze of golden fire. The vision that flooded his mind was of the very first head of the Zgart family, sword in hand, wiping out every monster in sight with a single powerful swing. The vision faded, and the MC saw a faint white glow emanating from the sword. People started snickering, remarking that they'd never seen such a pathetic little flicker before. This was colorless mana. What kind of quality could that possibly be? It looked like even the god of war couldn't be bothered with the child of a runaway. Sylvia rushed to his side, smiling reassuringly, telling him everything was okay and that he'd done it perfectly. But the others started sneering that while he might have the blood of a powerful family, this was just too much. They hadn't expected much, but this was a new low. They sneered that they'd only come to see him humiliated, and Sylvia was certainly brave for showing up. It seemed the only things he inherited were his hair color and red eyes. Glenn's voice, laced with annoyance, cut through the noise. There's been enough chatter. The hall's too loud. The selection ceremony's over. Everyone leave. Once all the guests had departed, the head of the family remarked that it seemed there was nothing to be done. My lord, Rowan the butler called out sadly. Glenn thought to himself that he hadn't expected much, but what? Was this? All of a sudden, the sword erupted in a blindingly brilliant light. He gasped in shock. It's a golden light like the sun. This was the aura of the first family head of the Zgart family. It held a divine firepower so immense that not even demonic flames could compare. Golden mana and golden flames had only appeared once in the entire history of their clan. The mana formed a dense golden light, a blindingly beautiful and radiant golden flame. Just what kind of person is this kid? Ron, a little later, once he was outside, the MC pulled up his status window. It read, 9-node frost curse, low stamina, weak mana, sensitivity. Ring of fire at stage 2 and water resistance at stage 2. Our protagonist figured that would have to do for now. All right, isn't it about time to level up the ring of fire to stage 3? Fast forward, and he reflected that 7 years had passed since that ceremony. He was now 12 years old. With the help of... He was so close to reaching the 3rd stage of the ring of fire. Things would move along much faster if he could just figure out how to manage this ice. His resistance to the water attribute had leveled up to the 2nd stage, so he wasn't freezing anymore. Moving was still a pain, but his condition was way better than before. He could finally start some physical training. Suddenly, Sylvia called out, telling him to get ready and asking what on earth he was doing out here. She said they had to hurry or they'd be late. Ron reluctantly agreed, figuring it must be time for the next selection ceremony. Great, he thought, now I have to face those annoying jerks again. A little later, once the ceremony was over, the assistant announced that Langresser Reader had performed admirably. And with that, the selection ceremony was done. Watching from the sidelines, Ron wondered if that was it, probably because it was only the side branches. That wrapped up way faster than he expected. All of a sudden, Glenn called out to him, his face dead serious, saying he was sure Ron had received the order to begin basic training. So why haven't you responded for an entire month? Ron was completely baffled, wondering what this guy was even talking about. What basic training? Sylvia frantically jumped in, explaining that Ron was different from the other children. His body was still overwhelmed with ice energy, making it hard for him to exercise. Ron was shocked. How did she know that Glenn answered with a threatening tone, "As long as you are in this family's domain. There are no exceptions for anyone who bears the Zgart name. If you can't walk, you will crawl, but you will train. That is the way of our family." "You can't force him to do this," Sylvia cried out, pleading. "Please just give him a little more time." "Perhaps you'd like to run away from the family again," Glenn sneered. "With that child, you will live on this land as a Zgart. If you don't like it, then get out of here this instant." Mocking whispers started to spread through the crowd. "She'll probably just run away again." "Yeah, right. She doesn't have an energy core or mana flows left to destroy. And how did someone like that end up in the main branch anyway? It's disgusting." Ron knew exactly why they treated his mother with such contempt. She had run away from the family before. Sylvia's posture proved she once studied martial arts, but she had no aura. Apparently, she'd lost her energy core and her mana flows were completely severed. That was the price she paid for marrying his father. But his father died while she was pregnant, leaving her no choice but to come back to this place. It was a given that a main branch member who willingly disgraced the family by leaving would be ridiculed if they ever dared to show their face again. Still, these were just the pathetic words of small-minded people. As long as he was Sylvia's son, there was no way he would just stand by and listen to them treat her like this. Without warning, Ron strode to the center of the hall. "What are you doing?" his mother cried desperately. "Get back here." "I can handle this myself." "It's all right," Ron replied calmly. "I will follow the order and start training next month." The instructor of the first martial arts hall spoke up. "Don't you understand? Even basic training is too much for someone in his condition. You can't force him to do this." Ron replied with a determined look. "It's fine. This is the only way to keep bearing the Zgart name. I will attend." Glenn asked menacingly, "Do you even comprehend the true weight of that name?" In that instant, Ron was slammed by an incredibly powerful aura that made his blood run cold. He felt like he was being crushed by that gaze alone. His heart was pounding out of his chest. This guy was on a whole other level than the Robert family, so this is the power of the Northern King of Destruction. Sylvia rushed over to hug him, shouting at Glenn, "Stop it, Ron is still just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying." The instructor chimed in urgently. "He's just a little boy. I'm asking you to please, calm down." But Glenn bit back, "I am the one speaking now." "He isn't ready for training," Sylvia said, terrified. "Stop crushing him with your aura," Ron thought to himself in stunned silence. "In my past life, I was an assassin, a man who lived and died in the shadows. I was always closer to death than to life, and I never once stepped into the light, but that's all in the past now. I'm done hiding in the shadows. I will no longer live the life of a killer. My name is Ron Zgart now, and I will win back the place that rightfully belongs to Sylvia." Approaching the throne, he explained that he'd grown up isolated in a side building of the estate, so he had no idea just how powerful and influential the Zgart family truly was. If training was the way to understand all that, then he was more than willing. He resolved to himself that he would protect Sylvia and bring happiness back to the people he'd grown to care for. Glenn questioned him, asking if he meant he was going to use the training to judge the family's standards. The protagonist replied that he saw no other way. Glenn then declared he would order the instructor to prepare a training regimen fitting enough not to let him down. He reflected on his past life, where he had been the world's greatest assassin. On top of that, he now possessed the Ring of Fire, a power thought to be nothing more than a myth. By combining his skills, he knew he could secure his spot in this family. He was determined to show them all just how powerful he could truly become. Later, during a training session, Karen Zgart, the instructor of the second training hall, turned to his assistant and asked, "Didn't you tell me this kid was too weak to even walk properly?" The assistant eagerly confirmed, adding that it was what a maid had overheard from the conversation between the family head and that tattered-looking saint. Apparently, the boy was suffering from a severe illness. The instructor's face grew grim as he thought, the kid's body is as frail as ever. How in the world did he withstand the head's aura? Karun noted that thinking back, Sylvia was exceptionally talented herself. He ordered his assistant to send a maid to their building immediately and have her report back on everything that goes on. A while later, at the 5th Zgart training hall, everyone bowed to greet the head of the family. Glenn walked over to the sofa and called out to the instructor, Rimmer, telling him to quit playing dead and get up. Rimmer rose to his feet, remarking that he was in peak condition as usual. Glenn retorted that his little napping act wasn't fooling anyone. All the other instructors were working their tails off, while he, the so-called head instructor, was just lazing around. Rimmer casually replied that they were just following his orders. He was doing the brain work while they handled the manual labor, so it was all perfectly fair. With a stern look, Glenn pointed out that Rimmer was already 50 years old and should start acting like it. Rimmer just smiled back, saying, "Forget all that nonsense about age. I'm an elf. Remember, by the way," Rimmer continued, "are you here for your youngest grandson? Sylvia stopped by earlier, though I have to admit I wasn't expecting you." Surprised, Glenn asked, "She came here as skirt in..." Rimmer grinned and confirmed, adding that she'd asked him to make sure Rayon didn't get hurt. "If that's why you're here too," he said, "you can save yourself the trouble." He reminded Glenn that he'd already made it clear he doesn't interfere with the training process in the 5th hall, and he makes no exceptions. Not even for the family's favorite little prodigy. The head of the family replied with a calm expression, "That's fine, I don't want you to go easy on him. Do as you see fit." "I have no use for weaklings," Glenn stated flatly. Rimmer watched him, a look of amused surprise on his face. "Wow, he thought his affection for the kid is even deeper than I realized. He's trying to give this boy all the love he couldn't give Sylvia." Glenn shot back irritably, "If you weren't an old friend, your head would be on the floor right now. Be tough on him. Weed out the weak immediately. I only want you to train those who are worthy." Rimmer simply smiled and said he would handle it his own way. "That's exactly what I expect," Glenn replied before turning to leave. As he walked away, the instructor called out with a grin, "Take care." Once the head of the family was gone, Rimmer wondered to himself just what kind of kid Rayon was. Meanwhile, Rayon opened his status window, which showed that the 3rd stage of the Ring of Fire was now accessible. The effects included increased mental and spiritual fortitude, heightened mana sensitivity, and a larger energy pool. It also boosted his endurance, strength, and agility, while his resistance to the water attribute rose to the 3rd stage, weakening the frost curse. A smile crept onto his face as he thought about how different the 3rd stage felt. His sensitivity to mana had shot up, and his mind felt sharper than ever. He recalled Sylvia's earnest warning not to push himself too hard on the very first day. He realized that because she'd stopped him when she did, his progress had been much smoother. The status window was a huge help for tracking his improvement, but he knew this was just the beginning. The Zgart family's training regimen was notoriously brutal. Reaching the 3rd stage of the Ring of Fire was merely the first step, a solid foundation he would use to keep growing stronger. This way, he'd get ahead faster than anyone else and finally shut up all the trash talkers. And after that, as for the heavenly sword, Daryus, he wouldn't rest until that guy's throat was slit. Suddenly, Sylvia's voice called out to him. She asked with a smile, "You're still awake, aren't you?" The MC asked her why she was there. "It's getting pretty late." She sat down beside him, explaining that since he was heading to the training hall tomorrow, she wanted to talk to him about it. "Do you really have to go?" she asked. "Honestly, I want to stop you. You never complain even when you're in pain. What if you get seriously injured there? It's not that I'm completely against it, but maybe for just one more year, could we please postpone it for at least 1 year?" Our hero replied that there was no need for that. He wasn't going to stand by and take it anymore every time someone from the main or collateral families decided to run their mouth. He was sick and tired of the way they looked down on her and the staff in their annex. He couldn't stand it. He was convinced that if he just excelled in his training, everyone would stop treating them so poorly. Sylvia mentioned she wasn't surprised he was upset about them living apart and all the terrible things people were saying. She explained that she'd unexpectedly fallen in love with his father during a mission, but their relationship was forbidden since he was only a knight, so she gave up her energy core and mana and left her family behind. He learned he actually had an older sister, Shia, who was 2 years older than him. The 3 of them had lived a quiet life together until the Eden mercenaries attacked. His father wasn't particularly strong, and with his mother pregnant with him, they were powerless to fight back. Fortunately, her father had secretly assigned guards to watch over them, but they were positioned too far away to help right away. By the time they arrived, his father and sister were already gone. Devastated and lost, she returned to her family home. Here she's treated like a sinner, and in her heart she believes she deserves it. He thought Sylvia was selfish for abandoning her duties for love, only to come crawling back once it was all gone. He finally understood why everyone treated her so coldly. And yet this was the woman who had given him life and a mother's love. She might have been selfish in the eyes of the world, but to him, she was his one and only mother across 2 lifetimes. He wondered if she regretted her choices. Did she long for the days before she left her family? Sylvia smiled and said she had no regrets. In her family, she was treated like she didn't exist. It was only after she left that she finally felt alive and loved, and that was enough for her. She was so happy during that time that she couldn't possibly regret it now. She just asked him to forgive his awful mother. He told her it was all okay, he was fine, and she shouldn't worry about him. He thought with a smile that it didn't matter what others called her. She was his only mother. He had no one else. He decided he would get his revenge on Daryus after he restored her status within the family. Hearing his words, Sylvia broke down in tears. Flustered, the protagonist asked why she was crying. A while later, he left her room, noting how difficult it had been to calm her down. He needed to practice the Ring of Fire and try to get some sleep. With little time left before training, the protagonist went to his room. Sitting in a meditative pose, he reflected on how well the Ring of Fire circulated now that it had reached the 3rd stage. He wondered what it would be like at the maximum level. Suddenly, as he was using the skill, the area was engulfed in blue flames, and the second demon lord appeared. He declared that the time had finally come. The boy's rage had reached him. In the name of rage, he proclaimed he would help the boy's dream of revenge come true. A system window then appeared stating that the rage characteristic was now unlocked. The user's rage has been awakened. The spirit declared, "Now sacrifice your soul and body to me." Wait, why is there a kid here? The protagonist asked in confusion. What is this thing? The spirit shot back that it was wondering the same thing. The rage it felt couldn't have come from a mere child. No, it's definitely him. There's a truly all-consuming dark rage lurking inside him. The spirit continued, "All right, just give me your soul and body and I'll help you get the revenge you desire." The MC wondered if this was happening because of the intense rage he felt toward Daryus before his death. If so, this thing was showing up a bit late. He didn't want to rely on anyone else's help. With a serious expression, he told the spirit he didn't need its assistance. He would get his revenge by himself and defeat Daryus with his own hands. The spirit scoffed, saying he'd misunderstood the situation. It wasn't there to make an offer. The decision had already been made. Suddenly, a cold flame washed over the MC, and he wondered what it was. The spirit then lunged at him, yelling that all he needed to do now was graciously offer up his body. As it got closer, the protagonist felt an intense chill. He thought to himself that his body and even his mind felt like they were freezing solid. This creature's power wasn't fire, but ice. The spirit told him to focus on Daryus and let his rage explode. It promised that with its power, he could kill anyone, even a god. The protagonist realized that he was only managing to resist because of his water attribute, but the attack wasn't just freezing him, it was actively fueling his rage. The spirit added that it would give him the power to utterly destroy his enemy. In return, all it wanted was his body. But the MC worried if he gave in, what would become of Sylvia and the maids. There was no way he was letting this thing take over his body, not for anything. The spirit taunted him, saying he'd feel much better if he just gave in to his rage and accepted his fate. There was no point in holding back anymore. It really wanted to do this cleanly, without causing any unnecessary damage since it planned on using his body. But if he kept resisting, it would just absorb his very essence no matter the consequences. The protagonist felt a frantic energy surge as his body was pushed to the brink of falling apart. He was almost at his limit and couldn't take it anymore. At this rate, he was completely done for. But wait, if his resistance to the water attribute let him endure the cold for so long, then maybe he could use the Ring of Fire to completely seal off his body and soul. The MC struck a pose, his face dead serious, as he realized he had no other choice. He was determined to live. Suddenly, the spirit sensed the fiery energy and shrieked, "It's only been a short time since I awakened." "How is this even possible? You're just a human and a kid at that," our hero replied with a steely gaze. "I'll get my revenge myself." and I'm not about to let some ghost use my body to do it." The spirit roared in fury. "How dare you call the lord of the demon world a ghost?" The protagonist just smirked and asked, "How can you be the lord of the demon world if you can't even kill me? It seems the so-called lords of the demon world are nothing special, so just disappear." It occurred to him that the spirit mentioned it had just awakened. Could that be why it couldn't use its full power? Just then, a system window popped up notifying him that additional skills were now unlocked. The MC wondered in surprise, "What do you mean, additional skills?" Suddenly, the spirit gasped in shock. "Those are my status windows. Where in the world did you get those?" Our hero casually explained that it just shows his abilities in the form of stats. "But is it somehow connected to you?" The spirit boasted that it was the one who created the system. "So I'll ask again, where did you get it from?" The protagonist asked with genuine confusion, "Why would you make something like this?" It replied that it wasn't about to answer him. The MC theorized it must be for rapid growth. The spirit blurted out, "How did you know that?" He thought to himself that this thing was terrible at controlling its emotions. It seemed strange that the ring of fire was spinning so much faster than in his past life, but now it all made sense. It was because of the system's influence. The spirit then furiously screamed, "Give up your power over the system and give me your body." In response, the protagonist threw a menacing punch, his fist crackling with mana, but realized it had no material form. That meant even mana wouldn't work. Considering no one had rushed in despite all the noise, he figured he was the only one who could see and hear it. He began to wave his hand near the entity, and the spirit furiously flew into his palm, solidifying into the form of a bracelet, and said that not much time had passed. Since its seal was broken, but its powers would return soon. When they did, he wouldn't be able to stop it. It vowed to stay with him until the day he died. The protagonist thought, "What a complete leech. I want to get rid of it right now, but then I might lose the system, and who knows what would happen." To Sylvia and Helen, "It's better to keep it close and watch it. I'll just have to suppress it and focus on getting stronger as fast as I can." The protagonist looked down and asked, "Why a flower bracelet?" "It doesn't really suit me." The spirit shrieked in displeasure. "You will respect my tastes." The MC just sighed and accepted it. A little while later in the corridor, Helen was saying, "I'm sure the young master will be fine." Sylvia replied, "I know, but still." At that exact moment, the protagonist came down from the second floor with a smile and announced that he was ready. It was time for him to go to the training hall. As they went outside, the maid said with a warm smile, "Please, stay vigilant and take good care of yourself." The protagonist agreed, adding that he would be careful. "We'll see each other again soon." Helen then called out to Sylvia, asking why she was sending the young gentleman off with such a worried look on her face. "You might make him anxious." Sylvia quickly walked up to him and said with a reassuring smile, "I believe in you." The MC replied that she shouldn't worry. He promised he wasn't going to overdo it and would back off immediately if things got too rough. As the protagonist set off, Sylvia asked anxiously, "Do you think he'll be all right?" Helen noted that he was already looking better. Perhaps he'll even be able to handle the training. She thought to herself that he was looking much healthier now compared to before. The woman recalled her farewell with the protagonist, where Helen noted that out of all the Zen hearts, his instructor was the sharpest. And since he was trying so hard, she was certain he would succeed. The protagonist smiled and agreed, promising her he could handle everything and wouldn't get hurt. He told her not to worry. He'd given his word and would keep it no matter what, asking her to just trust him. At that moment, Sylvia, with a sad look on her face, just asked him to return home safely. Sometime later, standing in the crowd at Zgart's 5th training hall, the MC thought to himself that a ton of people had gathered, and not just from his own family line. There were also students from vassal families and others who had simply received a recommendation, and according to Helen, there were so many people this year that they were even opening up the 6th hall. Suddenly, a couple of students started talking smack about him. One of them sneered that it looked like a light push would make him fall apart, while another questioned why a weakling like him even showed up, especially with a tacky flower bracelet. "He's so tasteless," they muttered. Hearing this, the spirit furiously exclaimed, "How dare they? Those parasites have no concept of taste at all. I'll completely destroy them." The MC calmly walked up to them and asked, "Instead of buzzing around like flies, wouldn't it be better to say what you think to my face? Or do you not realize how pathetic it is to whisper behind someone's back? The guy shot back, yelling for him to shut up. The only pathetic one here is you, the guy who got sent to the annex. The other one added with disgust, you're not even from the main branch. How dare you call us out? Unfazed. The protagonist pointed out, neither are you. So what gives you the right to judge me? Trash talk is only allowed for someone of a lower rank, isn't it? One of them furiously grabbed him and raised a fist just as Burns suddenly appeared and commanded them to stop. The training is about to start, he declared. Hundreds of people from the outside are here. Do you want to disgrace the Zgart name? The students immediately backed down, offering shameful apologies. Byrne then approached the protagonist and asked why he was sticking his neck out on the very first day, telling him he should know his place. You're nothing more than dust, he said. If you don't want to get kicked out of the annex, you'd better lay low. Byrne thought with annoyance that it was pure luck the leader had even noticed him. And he's already acting like he's all that, he thought. A loser like him will definitely wash out of training. As he started to walk away, he warned, if you don't know how to behave, you should leave right now. You won't be able to handle it anyway. The MC with a perfectly calm face teased, you certainly seem important. Where do you get all this arrogance? Is it because you're from the main branch, or do you have other reasons for talking so tough when you know nothing about me? Or did your daddy put you up to it? Go on, run, and cry to him, and let him punish the bad boy, he taunted. Byrne furiously exclaimed, how dare you? Just then, Rimmer kicked the gate wide open and shouted with a grin, are we fighting already? How brave is it because you're all just kids? Seeing him, the protagonist wondered, is this the magnificent sword of the Zgart family? I heard he retired because of damage to his energy core. I didn't expect to see him here, he thought. The instructor then asked with a smile, why don't you at least hold off on the fight until after the ceremony? Byrne walked away from the protagonist with a look of displeasure and got back in line. Rimmer introduced himself and announced that he was glad to see them all. He explained he would be their instructor for the training and that he'd been told there were 160 recruits here. This is way too many, he stated. So we'll be conducting a small test to weed out the extras. A quarter of you will be plenty for me. The students exclaimed in shock. Only a quarter. But why would he do that, one wondered. The instructor explained, I only need the best. I only train the elite. The protagonist's spirit furiously shouted that he was an arrogant bastard for daring to look down on them. The MC calmly shushed him and kept listening, as Rimmer sat down in a chair and said, my word is law here. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the head of the family. Well, isn't it about time we got started? So what are you waiting for? Start running. The foundation of martial arts is physical strength and mental fortitude. Run as long as you can until I tell you to stop. As the protagonist ran, the spirit grumbled that if they were going to be forced to run, he should at least be out in front. Why are you lagging behind? He asked. The protagonist shot back that this wasn't a competition, so there was no point in passing anyone. He figured the instructor was assessing their potential and character, not just what he could see with his own eyes. The true winner would be the person who endured until the very end. And he was determined to last no matter what it took. Just then, the instructor's assistants noticed that Byrne and Luna had taken a huge lead. One of them remarked that while everyone was moving fast, those two were on a completely different level. The other noted that they weren't even at their top speed yet. He was certain they could maintain that pace for another couple of hours without stopping. For them to be at this level at only 12 years old, it was terrifying to imagine their future potential. An assistant pointed at the main character and asked, that kid's name is Ron, right? He's clearly struggling to keep up and is already falling behind. The other replied that he'd heard Ron was sick. It's honestly a shock he's running at all, but he already looks completely exhausted. Rimmer, who overheard their conversation, thought with a smirk, well, now this is interesting. I've never seen a kid like him before. What's his story? He'd always believed that the people whose talents he couldn't immediately grasp were the ones who would become the strongest on the continent. His ability simply couldn't peer into the true depths of their power. He could see the destiny of most children clear as day. But this boy Ron was a complete mystery to him. He was obviously on a level so far beyond Rimmer that his vision couldn't reach him. What an amusing spectacle, he thought. At that moment, the other students started to taunt the protagonist, saying he talked a big game, but was now dragging his feet at the back of the line. Another one sneered that it served him right. He'll wash out soon enough. Just look at his face. He won't even last another 10 minutes. The main character thought, isn't this weird? They promised us some kind of hellish training, but we're just running. In his past life, he had to sprint for his life from enemies and savage beasts, and this was just a normal run. Isn't this a little too easy? After some time, Rimmer watched the protagonist's form and wondered in pure astonishment, what in the world is this? How is he still running? His stamina should have been completely depleted long ago. He's running way past his limits. He shouldn't have a shred of strength left. Is he actually moving on sheer willpower alone? This kid is willing to train until it literally kills him. The instructor cracked a surprised smile, noting that he was definitely getting interested. Meanwhile, Burns, seeing the protagonist still pushing forward, asked with irritation why he was still running. He'd been told the kid was too fragile for training. He remembered an instructor telling his father that according to the saint in rags, Sylvia's son had almost no chance of even surviving childhood. Mastering martial arts was supposed to be impossible for him because of the frost curse. Byrne thought he looked incredibly frail, so why in the world was he still running? The whole thing was just so infuriating. He was going to show him the unbridgeable gap between them. That kid would never be able to keep up with him. He activated his aura and shot forward at an incredible speed. The main character simply thought, he acts like a high and mighty nobleman, but he's really just a child. Even Luna is more mature than him. In any case, this test wasn't a race, it was a battle of attrition. There was no reason for him to ruin his own pace just because that guy wanted to showboat. After a while, a couple of the other students started to falter. One of them looked at him completely baffled and asked how he was still going. A girl with a sour look on her face piped up saying she'd heard he was sickly and asked, "Is he seriously not tired at all?" Hearing this, the protagonist thought to himself that he actually felt like he was on the verge of death from the cold energy raging inside him. It seemed like his lungs and heart were about to give out at any second. But he was pushing through by using his ring of fire to wring out every last drop of energy. The skill had improved a ton recently, and if he could just push it to its absolute limit, the benefits would kick in soon enough. Suddenly, the spirit of rage materialized, taunting him. "So this is the state you're in, and you're supposed to be my future vessel. Just hand over your body to me. I'll crush that blue-haired kid with ease. I could freeze this entire place solid." The MC thought anxiously that he just had to hold on. Rage was trying to flood his mind, but he had to act like everything was fine. He shot back at the spirit, telling it to shut up and stay quiet. His face a perfect mask. It wasn't going to work on him. The spirit just smirked, boasting that no one could ever withstand its fury. "We'll just see how long you can last." The protagonist clutched his chest, thinking he absolutely had to endure. If he showed even a hint of weakness, this thing would devour him completely. The spirit, annoyed, exclaimed, "What a stubborn punk! Why isn't my rage working on him?" Meanwhile, the protagonist was thinking, "I'm so tired. I feel like I'm actually dying. My body won't listen and my vision's going blurry. I can't even breathe right. Is this really my limit?" Just then, Rimmer announced the end of the run. All the students immediately stopped gasping for air. As Burr passed by the protagonist, he muttered with annoyance, "What a ridiculously stubborn guy." The MC thought to himself, "I seriously almost kicked the bucket back there." It looked like he wouldn't be getting any rest in this life either. The spirit of rage yelled in frustration, "You're a total monster. How did you manage that?" The protagonist shot back, "Told you it wouldn't work." He thought to himself that the struggle had also helped level up his ring of fire, and thanks to the status window, he could see his physical potential had improved. "If I keep training like this..." Suddenly, a system window popped up, announcing that the conditions had been met. Physical capabilities exceeded. Experience gain increased. Strength stat raised by 2 points. Agility by 1 point. And endurance by 1 point. Seeing this, the spirit of rage screeched in disbelief. "What is this? He gets extra experience just for having me in his system. This is absolutely ridiculous." The instructor then gathered everyone and told them they did a great job. That concludes the test. So, about that thing I said earlier about only picking a quarter of you, I was lying. You can all relax. The students erupted, shouting that they had run their guts out for his stupid test. Rimmer explained that he couldn't just kick out that many people on the very first day, but warned them that it was a one-time thing. If they continued performing like they did today, most of them would definitely be cut. He was sure he'd told them to run as if their lives depended on it, but out of 160 people, not a single one did except for one guy. Some of you gave up and some of you sneakily used your aura. Honestly, I don't really care how you managed to pass. After all, it was just a test. But from here on out, you better try to do exactly as I say and you won't fail. Don't think for a second it's going to be this easy again. For now, you can consider yourselves provisional students. In 6 months, you'll take the final exam, and that's when I'll really be watching. I'm only planning on keeping the best of the best, although I won't even be the one grading you. And now you can all head to the comfy dorms provided by the Zgart family. Oh, and one more thing to your left, you'll see the training center. A little while later, Rimmer strolled into the forest, where he spotted Glenn and realized someone had taken his usual resting spot. "So how'd it go?" the instructor asked with a grin. "Why are you even asking me? You've been here the whole time." "So you saw everything perfectly. You probably noticed that Burr and Luna are incredibly talented newcomers, and that the other kids have the potential to become pillars of the family. However, I saw nothing special in Ron. I was positive he was completely drained. So how on earth did he manage to run for so long? For the first time since we met, I couldn't read someone at all. Ever since my core was damaged, my life has been so dull. But now it feels like things are about to change." Glenn hopped down from the rock and remarked, "I'm thinking I'd like to be an instructor for the new recruits myself, and to focus on his duties." As the leader left, Rimmer smiled, agreeing, but added that he had a feeling some of this year's students were worth paying very close attention to. Glenn replied that it was just a coincidence and that Rayon would never be able to become a martial artist. The instructor just grinned, knowing full well that it was anything but a coincidence. A while later, the main character announced that since training was over, he was heading to the training center. The spirit of Fury asked in disbelief, "You're going to train again. Do you ever take a break?" The students who overheard him groaned that this was just impossible. Later, as they were sitting in their room, one of them grumbled that there was no way he could have lasted that long on his own. He must have cheated somehow. Another agreed, adding that everyone knew about his poor health. That's when Glenn Zgart, a representative of a side branch, spoke up, that they figured he must have used some kind of special remedy. Word on the street was that a saint in rags had personally mixed the medicine for him. They exclaimed, "What is this?" Supposed to mean that he ran for so long by chugging a potion. "He's got some nerve using an advantage like that," Crane asked with a smirk. "Well then, don't you all think we should teach this loser a lesson?" A little while later, they managed to corner our protagonist, shoving him hard against a tree. He asked in confusion what they were doing. Crane just smirked and shot back, "Are you seriously asking?" One of the goons furiously shouted that he'd used a magic potion just to show off. "Now I get why. You were so damn confident." Another one yelled, "If it wasn't for that holy remedy, you wouldn't have lasted a single minute. You think you can use dirty tricks, and nobody will find out." The MC was just baffled at how they were losing their minds over such a stupid reason. They started cracking their knuckles and said with nasty grins that they were about to teach him a private lesson. Crane, with a sly smile, added that this was just common practice, nothing personal. He'd heard the instructor correctly after all. Learning is the light of the future. He then lunged forward to throw a punch. The spirit of Fury grumbled discontentedly, "How long are you going to sit here and listen to their annoying whining? And you call yourself my vessel? These punks are not a big deal." Instantly, the MC seized the initiative and slammed his fist into the guy's face before asking, "You guys want to learn something? All right, then, class is in session." Another one of them decided to attack, but the protagonist deftly drove a knee into his gut and took him out of the fight. The last one standing asked fearfully, "What the hell are you doing? You don't really think you can lose to someone like him, do you?" The protagonist instantly decked him and began to mop the floor with the rest. The spirit of Fury, watching the whole thing admiringly, noted that it was surprising how well he was handling himself. After a bit, Crane was on his knees apologizing and admitting they were wrong. The MC pinned his arm with his foot and said with a smile, "If you want this lesson to end, you'll answer one question correctly. Who put you up to this? Was it Burr?" He frantically replied that it wasn't true. He didn't know anything. They had decided to do it themselves. Burr had nothing to do with it. The protagonist thought that this was unexpected. He was sure that guy hated him. Maybe all wasn't lost just yet. Our protagonist then proposed, "Let's keep the contents of our little lesson a secret. How does that sound?" Crane responded in terror that he could do as he pleased. The MC grabbed him by the hair and said, "You and your friends better stay away from me or you'll get extra lessons. A final lesson. If you so much as touch my shadow again, you'll disappear. If you understand me, then get out of my sight." At that moment, Rimmer, who was peeking from behind a tree, thought that this was quite the tense scene. It felt like their young master had returned to his old self. It seems he's actually gifted in martial arts. Then again, he is a Zgart. It's not surprising. He's a talent growing in the shadows, hidden among all these other gifted kids. It never fails to amaze me. Sometime later, the protagonist returned to his room. A system window popped up, which said that the conditions were met. Rage is pleased with his actions. Dexterity increased by 1 point. The spirit himself exclaimed with displeasure, "You got bonus points for that. What kind of nonsense is this?" The MC, with a calm face, pointed out, "You're the one who made the system, so what's..." With all the questions, he irritably shot back, "Of course you don't get it. You've never had your own system hijacked before." He swiped the power meant for the MC and doesn't have a shred of gratitude. Now he's got a proposition for him. How about a little wager? If the MC wins, he gets a sweet bonus. If he loses, he has to stop resisting Rage. Just then, system windows popped up, making it official. Rage was offering a bet. The condition was to ace a training test with the top score. If he succeeded, he'd get a 2-point boost to all his stats, plus another stat of his choice. But if he lost, he'd get hit with a 10-day rage penalty. The MC asked what he meant by this test Rimmer had mentioned. The spirit confirmed it was the one where the instructor said he'd pick the best students. Then our hero asked what exactly a stat of his choice meant. Rage explained that he'd get to claim one of the spirit's own stats. Of course, this would weaken the spirit, seeing as it was just a freeloader. The protagonist then asked what the rage penalty was all about. The spirit replied that he'd basically give in to the emotion of rage and fall a little more under its control. It was just a small nudge, but for Rage, it was more than enough. He wouldn't be able to keep his composure so well anymore. The MC realized, so that was the spirit's endgame. Considering its usual behavior, he didn't think it was lying. It had always been surprisingly honest with him. Besides, the rewards for winning were just too tempting to pass up. It was like being offered a poisoned apple. Getting to the top of the class would be a long shot for a normal sick kid, but he was reincarnated. Our protagonist figured it didn't sound like a bad deal. "All right," he said, "I accept your challenge." With a sly grin, the spirit called it a wise choice and a system window appeared, announcing that he had accepted Rage's conditions. Our hero was confident, thinking there was no way he could lose with his past life's experience. Sometime later, after another brutal training session, all the students were collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. A little earlier, Rimmer had ordered them all to hold a horse-riding pose. He said it sounded stupid, but it was the very foundation of their martial arts course. They all needed to learn how to endure it. He told them to hold the stance until he said so while he was going to take a nap. Of course he wasn't forcing anyone. As he said, they were the ones who had to pass the test, not him. At that moment, one of the students finally snapped, shouting that he couldn't take it anymore. When were they going to learn how to actually fight with swords? A girl chimed in that all they ever did was run around and stand in silly poses. Vernon, however, asked with a calm face what there was to complain about. He argued they could practice with swords on their own time. If they only focused on basics, they'd forget what they'd already learned. The spirit of Rage watching this noted that the others were leaving. They were off to practice their sword skills by themselves. "Aren't you going?" it asked. The MC simply replied that there was no need for that. What was the point of learning fancy combat techniques if he hadn't properly strengthened his body with basic training? He figured he didn't even need a sword right now. His priority was to build up his core physical strength and endurance. His body was weaker than the others because of the frost curse, so the basics were absolutely essential for his growth and training. For now, he wasn't in any hurry, so he would focus on conditioning his body. With that, our protagonist entered the gym and began working through various exercises. At that very moment, Luna, peeking from behind a wall, was thinking about that boy Ron. He was getting stronger incredibly fast and was already lifting much more weight than he did yesterday. They all said he was sick, yet he kept increasing the weight every single day. Sure, it's normal for someone to get stronger with daily trainings, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to increase the weight you're lifting every single session. He was already able to lift 10 kilograms more than at the start of the week. Maybe it was just his different approach to training. But how could he be so strong while suffering from an illness? There was definitely something more to him. The girl walked right up and stood in front of him. The MC, a bit confused, asked, "Did you need something?" Without answering, she just kept looking at his face, thinking to herself, "How is he progressing so quickly?" After a moment, she sat down next to him and started lifting a barbell herself. They continued to work out, but as she glanced at him, she was sure she wasn't just imagining it. From the moment she caught a whiff of that cool, pleasant aroma coming off him, her own body began to feel lighter. Thanks to this, she was able to lift way more weight than usual. After some time, she was just sitting there on the bench, staring at her own hand when Ron walked up and asked, "You sure you don't have anything to say?" She just shook her head, and he, scratching the back of his neck, just walked away. She watched him go, thinking she ought to keep an eye on him for a little while longer. After a bit, Byrne glared after them, and his buddies indignantly asked why she was even hanging out with a guy like him. What's so special about some dude who isn't even from the main family? One of them scoffed that his training methods were total garbage. All that endless strength training is pointless. Ron's weak, so I guess that kind of training is necessary for him. But even if he gets all beefed up, he'll never be on our level. He has no idea what's coming for us in the test. If he really wanted to prepare, he'd be better off practicing his swordsmanship, at least for some basic self-defense. Who cares about that outcast from a branch family anyway? Come on, let's go. The test results will say it all. A little while later, Ron was back at it, lifting dumbbells. Dorian shuffled over and awkwardly introduced himself, asking if he could join in. He put a hand to his chest and asked if Ron would mind if he showed him the proper form, mentioning he was a student who got in on a recommendation. Ron replied that he didn't mind one bit. A beaming Dorian immediately opened his bag, thanked him, and said, "I've got some cookies here. Here, you've got to try one." "They're delicious," he insisted. Ron took the cookie, but then glanced over at Luna and said, "I don't want it. You can have it." He was then caught off guard when he saw Luna's intense gaze completely fixed on the cookie. He handed her the treat, thinking to himself, "Well, what do you know?" The training continued day in and day out. The calendar pages turned, autumn leaves began to fall, and just like that, 6 months had passed. Every single day, Ron ran himself into the ground as if his life depended on it. The backs of the guys who left him in the dust on the very first day were no longer blocking his view. After a hard, exhausting struggle, he'd left almost everyone behind him. As time went on, only 2 people remained in front of him. A little while later, the instructor announced that he was glad to see them all. He then asked the parents and guardians to please take their seats. At that very moment, Wrath zipped over to Ron and sneered, "You didn't forget about our bet, did you? Don't get your hopes up. There's no way you'll be able to overtake those 2. He grinned maliciously, adding, "Get ready to surrender to my rage." Ron just waved a dismissive hand, shooing him away, and said, "Who even knows what the conditions for this test are?" "We don't know yet." He then turned to Dorian and asked what he was doing. Dorian, holding a plank on the ground, replied that he was just really nervous about the test. "I couldn't sleep a wink last night," he whined. What a weakling. Ron thought, how's he going to get through this? Ron stayed quiet as Luna called his name and asked if he wanted a cookie. She held the treat out to him, but he just held up a hand and said, "No thanks." And that's when he spotted Byrne, making him think, why can't these weirdos just leave me alone? Meanwhile, as Sylvia was finding her seat, she excitedly told Helen, Look, I found Ron. He looks so proud and confident." Helen smiled warmly and replied, "I see him. He survived 6 months of that brutal training, and it looks like he's even made some friends." "I'm not surprised at all with how friendly he is. Young Master Ron has always been so considerate even as a child. He was never once capricious. He's already made friends. I'm so proud of him." Just then, Rimmer called for everyone to greet the head of the family, and onto the stage walked Glenn himself. A shockwave went through the crowd. The patriarch was here. Is he actually going to watch? He's never come to watch before. After that, the head of the family took his seat, and the instructor asked in surprise, "Patriarch, what brings you here?" Glenn simply replied, "The family's future depends on these children. Why shouldn't I watch? Or perhaps you're not happy to see me." Rimmer nervously scratched the back of his head with a forced smile and stammered, "Not at all, sir. You are always welcome here, Patriarch." He then raised his hand and announced cheerfully, "Well then, since the head of the family himself has honored us with his presence, we won't delay any further. We will now begin. Okay, I'll give you the test details in a nutshell." In the very next instant, he unleashed his powerful aura. The kids instinctively threw their arms up to shield themselves from the pressure, and he explained, "You just have to break through this aura of mine. That is the one and only condition for passing this test. Aura is an integral part of any martial artist. This test will determine whether you are worthy of becoming one." One of the men present, folding his arms over his chest, objected. "Hold on," he complained. "These kids haven't really studied aura. Why is this suddenly on the test?" Another quickly agreed with him. "That's right. Some of them haven't even started practicing with it. This is totally unfair." Someone else whispered, "They say he sleeps during training." "And what's that supposed to mean?" Rimmer sighed, closing his eyes, and explained that aura isn't like some muscle you can train. It's the original power that comes from the strength of a master's spirit. It is the spirit that serves as proof that one is a true martial artist. The aura is merely secondary. The man objected. "What the hell is he even talking about?" The next second, Glenn confirmed that he wasn't lying. Even if you haven't trained to control your aura, every person has an inner will that responds to it. This test can be passed with the strength of your spirit alone. The instructor just grinned, confirming it, then threw his arms wide and asked, "All right then, any other complaints?" "Okay, time to start the test. Luna, you're up first." He then motioned for everyone else to back up. As she walked up, he explained the deal. "All right, Luna, for this test, I'm going to unleash a burst of aura. If you've really been putting in the work, you should be able to push through it. The goal is to break past my aura and tag me." And just like that, it began. A split second later, a massive wave